So welcome everyone to the first day of IST 2021 conference. And our session today is looking at the practice of design. I am Shandana Yusuf, and an architectural historian and an associate professor at the University of Utah, and I'm signing in from Salt Lake City. I think I've attended 4 of IST conferences. I try to do at least 4 or 5 of these. Today we have 4 papers, 20 minutes each. We originally had 5 speakers, but one of them is unfortunately not able to join us. So this should leave us plenty time for a Q&A. I would welcome all the audience to put their questions in the Q&A or hold them, and we will have an opportunity for you to be able to unmute and ask the question directly. The first paper is entitled Revamping German Education Facilities into Communal Centers and the Role of the Architect. This paper is presented by Hans Breker and Dr. Bedor Breker, who have their own practice in Hamburg, and that is called Hans Breker Architect. And this paper reflects on their own practice, its policy, the policy context in which they are doing this new design work, and what it requires of the skills that it requires of them as architects. So with this, I hand it over to Han. Could you take it from here? How do I unmute Han? I think, Umar, could you do it, please? Umar, could you unmute Han, please? Okay, Han, I think you're good.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, great. So,
so wait a second. So just a housekeeping, all the speakers could unmute themselves and mute themselves. Okay, just Han, yes, go ahead.
Okay, now I need to
do a screen share.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do it yourself.
This is deactivated by the host.
So Omar, could you please activate the... I see a lot of friends, so it's really nice to have them in the... Okay, done.
Okay. Wait a moment. So, okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Jan Breker. I'm an architect based in Hamburg, Germany, and our research is titled Revamping German Educational Facilities into Communal Centers and the Role of the Architect. In the next few slides, and based on our field of expertise, we will explain how our role as architects has changed in Germany in the past decade. As Parsey says here in his quote, we try to find our own way in making complex process of design as simple as it can be. I think it's necessary to give a quick brief on the German educational system and how it underwent substantial changes recently, which were initiated by new political programs. One of the main concerns of those programs is to target the German social structure through complex transformations of existing buildings and constructing new ones. Reflecting on the needs of the community as a pressing priority, the German government followed a policy of offering extended childcare services for working parents in the past 15 years. This initially started with a program that offers young parents the chance to take time off for up to 15 months after the birth of their child. To follow up on this strategy, the government granted every family the right of space for their child at a daycare. This eventually caused a booming establishment of new nurseries, kindergartens, and schools that are largely funded by the German state. Our paper tries to explain the process undertaken by the triangle of the local communities, the parliament representatives, and the architects in order to realize this typology of projects. Through presenting 4 projects, which our office has handled during the past 10 years, the paper highlights the different mechanisms and the new challenges that are shaping the role of the architect nowadays in times of socio-political awareness. Many researchers and scholars talked about the importance of family structure in achieving healthy urban developments. In our literature review, we tried to get solid information regarding the change in the social structure of young families in Germany and in Europe in general. In the next section of this presentation, we would like to talk about the family structure in aging Germany. According to the latest reports, Germany had around 8 million families with children below the age of 18 in 2015. Beside the average family model, there are around 1.6 million single parents. Most of them are women, with only around 11% of children being raised by only their father. The number of same-sex couples with children is still comparatively low in Germany, though it has more than doubled since 1996 from 3,000 to 7,000. By contrast, the number of extended families with several generations living under one roof has declined since 1995 from 351,000 to 209,000. We also find that many young professionals in Germany put off starting a family as they first opt to pursue their education and then start a career. When their first child is born, they are on average in their 30s. This also justifies the small average number of children per family. 53% in Germany have only one child. It is also a fact that Germany is in a state of constant aging. It needs more youth, as it's now the country with the oldest population after Japan. Although the birth rate is at the highest level since the reunification, it is still lower than the EU average of 1.58. The number of young households under 30 is lowest across the country. The head of 35% of the German households is 60 or older, while 21% is between 40 and 49, and 17% between 50 and 59. With the need to create a lifestyle for those young parents in which they can unify their family and their job, Germany issued many aid programs, such as child allowance, also parental allowance, tax incentives, and subsidies for pregnant women, and the school system is for free. With the turn of the 90s and the new millennium, social rituals, constant demands of work, and trends in life planning have dramatically changed, which required a swift change in the format of communal and educational spaces. This pressure gave the chance for politicians and policy experts to start reforming the existing templates of family policies. The introduction of all-day schools in Germany in 2003 enabled teachers and other pedagogical staff the interlocking of formal and non-formal learning. Since 2007, parents have been able to take paid break from work, where the state pays a parental allowance amounting to 65% of net income for a total of 15 months. Since 2013, every child was permitted a legal right to kindergarten place from their first year of age, where federal states invested heavily in the expansion of childcare facilities for infants and schools for older children. In 2017, around 2.5 billion euros were granted to the 16 German states for additional university spaces. Today, more than ever, school is not just becoming an inviting place for learning, but also a new home for living, and in some cases, a vital space for community interaction. Within this framework, in the following section, we are discussing 4 of our recent projects in Hamburg that dealt closely with the idea of engaging the community during the process of decision-making in order to create the most fulfilling educational facility. We asked ourselves these questions while dealing with each project. How could the facility look like, either new or extended? What kind of spaces should it provide, and who is using those new spaces? How should the common spaces be designed? And most importantly, how can the building, either a school or kindergarten, become a catalyst for coherent community development? In the context of urban development within Hamburg, schools are gaining particular importance as a central focus of community life in neighborhoods and districts. The implementation of good quality educational facilities and what can be perceived as socially deprived districts might counteract issues such as social segregation and even promote the improvement of socio-cultural life in those areas by attracting young families and single parents who can manage the balance between work and life thanks to the new needs-based childcare facilities. The federal government has provided massive financial assistance to create new kindergarten spaces and improve existing schools. This new policy requires highly qualified specialists and state initiatives to propose pilot projects that can serve the community as a whole. Those educational facilities can become the catalyst for societal improvement. In working with more than a dozen communities over the past 10 years, we were involved with school districts of different scales and budgets of various values. Throughout the process, we found some common aspects during the planning process, which kept appearing in different projects in a way that helped us to tackle new projects with more awareness and sensibility. We were also guided by the current learning techniques and teaching methods that indicated the need for a new form of learning environment in specific spatial settings, which is characterized by small group activities within different activity surroundings. Throughout our direct contact with school leaders, politicians, teachers, and parent representatives, we managed to conduct organized and productive planning processes. Through those meetings and community workshops, we were able to find the right design answers for the simple questions of who, what, where, how, and when. We will present now 4 projects which are located in Hamburg and can be considered from our perspectives as evidence on how the right coordination between different stakeholders during the planning process has strongly helped us reach those answers. I will try to give a glimpse on each project through talking about the 3 main aspects: the background, the process, and the outcome. The first project I'm going to talk about is a community school in Bönningstedt. This school is a secondary school which was built in the 1970s, originally accommodating 2 schools in 1 complex. The building has a large hall that functioned as the main central space for both schools together during a regular academic semester. That space was also utilized during holiday intervals as a community venue for bigger events such as Christmas parties, school inaugurations, and similar activities. Our office was approached by the local authorities to check some roof leakage in the existing building at the beginning. After a few meetings with the local authorities and the headmaster, discussions led to the conclusion that the school is too small to cope with the current pedagogic policies. The 3 villages, on the other hand, complained about the absence of a proper local assembly space. In the past, big restaurants and pubs accompanied with large barns used to host big social events within the village, like weddings and jubilees. Nowadays, those spaces, unfortunately, are slowly disappearing, as well as there are churches that suffer from dwindling influence on their communities, as the congregation is losing a lot of members constantly since the 1970s, which meant the need for a new public space that would become a spatial substitute of both the pub and the church. The committee decided on transforming the existing big hall of the school into an assembly hall that can host gatherings, parties, and other communal public activities for around 500 persons, in addition to the educational purposes. The process of developing a scheme was reached throughout a series of meetings and several workshops on different levels. One level was the school administration, the local authorities, teachers of the afternoon schooling, and the janitor, who knew the buildings and the detailed technical problems. This project developed from a leaking roof problem into a rather large extension of the school facilities. And creating
I'm finding out the best. Oh, hang on, I turned my sound down. Hang on.
Sorry?
Sorry,
through altering the school as its heart and transforming it into a new communal hub for 3 communities. The second project is a primary school in Trettau. The existing school is considered the nucleus of an old school campus that consists of a gymnasium hall adjacent to another school on one side. And on the other side, there are several kindergartens, big sport fields, a sports hall, and a tennis club. All facilities are being used by the pupils in the community. In this case, 15 villages are involved who failed to agree on future developments for a decade. We were invited to take part in a competition to get the job of extending the existing primary school from the 1970s. We proposed a scheme that highlighted the importance of the primary school as the center of the community complex. Our office insisted on a series of organized meetings to overcome misunderstandings between the different stakeholders. All 15 villages had to be involved in order to get the necessary approval of funding and the green light to move forward with the design processes. At that stage, our office proposed to start project team meetings with the school administration, some representatives of the large committee, local authorities, and parents' representatives. The meetings resulted in a broad vision that helped our team to develop our conceptual design scheme, which was based on creating a holistic vision for the entire campus development in the long term. Throughout the process of this project, we learned how to act as the mediator. We managed to establish a productive bond between the 15 villages and unite them for the greater good of their community. Our scheme highlighted the importance of considering the important social role of the school as a community center that will guide the expansion of the community on the long run. Moving to a kindergarten in Priesdorf, the community had a kindergarten which was considered very small due to the new German regulations. The village had an existing community hub in the center of the village, including a sports hall and the center of the local fire engine department. This department had an important role in this community due to its nature as a service where the villagers participate voluntarily in their free time. It is also a place where many events, meetings, celebrations take place, and is being passed on from one generation to the next, especially in the countryside. The objective was to enhance an existing communal space through creating a new adjacent kindergarten. That space was a place where the local committee meetings of the politicians would take place. It was also a place where old people would be taken care of, not to mention evening celebrations. Our office won an architectural competition, and after we were commissioned, our team coordinated a series of productive meetings with community representatives, funding authorities, and the staff running the kindergarten. The project's main idea was to build our project around a 100-year-old tree as a symbol for the community's heart. 5 years after completion, we have been asked to build a new extension to our kindergarten. Our involvement with this village takes the form of an ongoing process of enhancing the society and creating a sense of community through the triangle of the community, the decision makers, and us, the architects. Lastly, another kindergarten in Appen. The community of Appen has around 5,000 inhabitants and the traditional agglomeration setup. They have their church, a primary school, a kindergarten that was always run by their church. In the 1990s, an old farm building was transformed into a beautiful community center which accommodated the local committee meetings, weddings, and even annual classical music concerts. The community was growing and needed more space since the existing kindergarten was small. There was a vacant area behind the community center, which had a prime location in the center of the village. So the community agreed on using that empty area for their new kindergarten. When our office got involved in designing the new kindergarten, we took part in many meetings with the politicians and the representatives of Appen. We moderated a lot of discussions regarding the design directions, the social benefits these new buildings would provide to their community, and the funding processes. The new kindergarten houses 120 children, which is a big size for a village like Appen. But at the same time, it means that over 100 families of young parents, almost from the same generation, are utilizing the spaces around the kindergarten and the community center and can at the same time pursue their careers. This kindergarten slowly becomes a catalyst for the heart of Appen's younger community. We also asked ourselves, what did we learn throughout the process? Our experiences with those 4 projects and others through our office, we gained a good and valid expertise that paved the way to start designing designated spaces as community centers that can also be educational. In 2020, we were approached by the community of Legerdorf to design a living organ for the village. Our idea was developed around the notion of everyone under one roof and evolved in a building proposal which can be extended and modified around a community hall, which serves as the heart of the village life. We developed a technique of storytelling to imagine the needs and roles of the members of the community and thereby shape the actual spaces. The use of standardized solutions guided by local regulations are no longer acceptable in light of the variety of new teaching learning approaches that demand different spatial requirements. There's a pressing need now to create an evaluation mechanism that is capable of sensing the evolving needs of the educational system and accordingly the spatial requirements. Throughout our experiences with those 4 projects, it was clear to us that community buildings integrate traditional top-down decisions with bottom-up approaches. Participation in design processes represents a valid sense of influencing the decision-making process. For us as architects, the process of direct interaction and consensus discussions with the policymakers in different communities provided us with relevant information for our database that helped creating the right design solutions. It was clear to us as professionals that community-driven initiatives can have a greater chance for success because they are more aware of the realities of their own societal needs than outside professionals. The participatory process that allows the empowerment of grassroots, direct interaction with the decision makers can result in a sense of ownership of the project, and the users start to develop a new sense of belonging. Since communities are diverse by nature, formed by people who reflect differences in age, culture, ethnicity, gender, aspirations, and ability, this range of viewpoints enriches the design process, and it is highly valuable for the diversity of perspectives, which enriches the process. We also strongly believe that involving the youth in the process of decision-making is vital. Their involvement in community activities creates an indispensable sense of belonging and increases the opportunity to become socially productive, especially when it comes to creating schools and kindergartens. Thank you for paying attention.
Thank you so much. You still had a minute left, so perfect timing. Yeah. All right. So our next speaker our next paper is presented by Arif Sitavan of Kennesaw State University in Georgia. The paper is titled "The Dynamics of New Mosque Design in Indonesia and Expressions of Piety as a Lifestyle." Arif is working through the impact of technologies, of information technologies on religious identities and the commodification of religious architecture, particularly by looking at the mosque. And he talks a little bit about the polarization that information technologies have brought in the conversations around the community. So Arif, I hand it over to you.
Right, thank you so much. Okay. Right, hello everybody. Thanks so much for attending the sessions. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Professor Shundana Yusuf, for moderating this panel. Let me share my screen. Okay, does this work now? Correct. Today I would like to talk about the expressions of piety in the built environment, which is actually about one facet of the politics of identity. And in this case, I would like to focus on what happened in Indonesia. Right? And now we are all aware today of the surge of influences of religions in every facet of our everyday life, in public life, in every part of the world, from the US, Europe, Asia, all the way to Indonesia. Indonesia itself is the largest Muslim society in the world. Nominally, it is a secular democratic republic. Like, Islam came to Indonesia in the 14th century. Although nominally it's the largest Muslim society for ages, for centuries, people actually were very slow to embrace Islam as a way of life in Indonesia. But that has changed dramatically in the last 25 years. In modern Indonesian history, there were three major forces, political forces in Indonesia since the 1940s. Since the early 20th century, in the left, then nationalists and the Islamists. In the 1960s, the nationalist regime pushed the left and then sidelined the Islamists. But in a remarkable turn of event in the late 1980s, the nationalist regime started to court the Islamist forces and then that started a big cultural change in Indonesia. Like Islam started to color the life of Indonesians. Here, Indonesia is in Southeast Asia, also is the largest archipelagos in the world. Now here, like the religious turns that happen in Indonesia. Like so, nowadays, like the expression of being Muslim. Being a Muslim, right, this has been permeated in every part of life. Right? All legislative body at all level of government pass out like all these legislations that cater to the Islamic forces, like the consumptions of goods and services that are sanctioned by religions like halal or like just like kosher thing. Like it's a must now if any businesses would like to thrive. Right? And of course, in public spaces, like the people wearing scarves is like a very common sight. Like 25 years ago, if even 15 years ago, wearing scarf is a very tiny minority, but now it's just completely the other way around. So the socioeconomic background of this was the rise of the Muslim bourgeoisie in the late 90s. Now the attitudes among the Muslims like being rich is good. Again, with this economic growth, right? Also the Muslims also started to dominate the political life, and in turn, like they started to crave the desire to express how being a Muslim in Indonesia, and that's create a marketplace for all people who offer advice or product or services that cater to these expressions of being a Muslim. So this started in the late 90s with the popularity of TV and radio preachers, but as we all know, right, our media now has shifted from print to technology in the past, the electronic media, and now nowadays is the prevalence of the digital media. Here's the latest meaning, when the paper was written last year, the statistic of the users of internet and social media in Indonesia, and the daily activities, the frequency of virtual activities in Indonesia. This now here I can some examples of what people offered in through the internet, like WhatsApp or Instagram or Twitter, and so on and so forth. Now, in my paper, in my literature review, I refer to all the studies about this, the creations of these virtual public spaces, in which the theory there are argued about the reliance on visual language, as a way to capture audience through this all means of social media. So all these influencers now are no longer dominated by a few popular preachers, but everybody could offer things on the internet. And this, so from this, I like to what I try is just to connect that to architecture, and of course, the manifestations of this religious turns is in architecture, of course, the typology which clearly reflect that is the mosque. Nowadays, the mosque is very ubiquitous in Indonesian landscape, urbanscape, and outside the cities, everywhere. Of course, statistics in Indonesia are very unreliable, but a visual glance, like every few hundred meters, 100 to 100 meters, we could see a new mosque springing up everywhere. Right? And the Council of Mosques Indonesia claimed that the number of Muslim worship place in Indonesia now has reached the number of around 800,000, which is roughly about one mosque for every 250 Indonesian Muslims. Here, and this is what my interest in this paper is this the change in design of mosques, right, and along with this religious terms in Indonesia. Okay. I'm focusing my paper on the city of Yogyakarta. Yogyakarta is the cultural capital, cultural centers of the Javanese, the largest ethnic groups in Indonesia. As a background, Indonesia is a multi-ethnic country with more than 200 different ethnic groups. Like, so here's a historic city which has both traditional and colonial, heavy traditional colonial influences. Right? During the struggle of independence, it was the capital of the nations, and now it's one of the major educational centers in the country, which means that it draws everybody, right, all from all over parts of Indonesia to study and live and work in the city. What I do with my paper is that I started by kind of like cataloging the historically, right, the transformations of design of the design of mosques in Indonesia. The traditional mosque, in Java, in particular in the city of Yogyakarta. Javanese traditional mosque usually consists of two parts, like an open hall at the front and enclosed hall at the back. It's based on wooden frame structure, and from the outside, the primary feature is the use of a pyramidal hip roof, which all of these features were influenced by Hindu architecture from the 11th and 12th century. This was the way people designed and built walls, okay, up until the first part of the 20th century. But then since the 1950s, Indonesian people started to see the emergence of what we call the modernist mosque. And this is where a dome started to enter the vocabulary of architectural design. And the design also changed, right, from a frame structure into simple geometric form like this, constructed using a concrete frame and masonry. And this is something that is common in Indonesia in 1950s and the 1960s up until 1970s. Okay. But then in the 1980s, right, the popularity of what is called the neo-traditionalist or neo-vernacular design, right, in every institutional design in Indonesia. Right. Here behind this was the drive from the regime at the time, right, for a tightly scripted narrative of what Indonesia means, including all this cultural expression, including architecture. Specifically for mosques, the government sponsored the construction of thousands of mosques based on traditional Javanese mosques, which put heavy emphasis on this layered pyramidal roof. But instead of a mosque with multiple spaces, like traditional Javanese mosque, like this neo-vernacular mosque usually consists of only a single space surrounded by terraces on three sides. So those are like the common way of people designing mosques in Java, in Yogyakarta in particular. What I do next with in my paper is like I'm cataloging, right, and categorizing mosques in the city. First is what I categorize as community mosques, or mosques embedded in each neighborhood. It has like a long historical and social presence. Like it comes in various shape, scale, conditions, appearance. This serve as social and educational and religious centers. Again, the relationship with worship is very organic, right? Because it's become part and parcel of the fabric of everyday life in the city. Okay. But then, since early 1990s, right, the emergence of what I categorize as institutional mosques, mosques that are built in school, offices, companies, right? In the past, usually those facilities, those institutions only had like a small praying room, but then, right, since the 1990s, right, every institution's built a large building like this, located at the most prominent locations in the campus, at a large scale. Okay. As a part of their facility, and the relationship with worship is very mechanical, right? So because of the schedule of the working activities and also the educational activities, okay? And this is like the current trends, right? What I categorize as transient malls, right? Place of for praying that are built in shopping mall, shopping center, recreation place, tourist destinations, rest area, gas stations. Again, they come at a very various scale, size, and appearance, and styles. The relation is very transient. People use this space just because they happen to be there, right? And the next category is what I call a celebratory malls. Right? This has historical roots because in traditional Japanese cities, a center of a city would always have a mosque, a public piazza, a palace, a garrison, and a market. Those elements that symbolize power and authority. But then now, right, successful business persons, like kind of like competing to build large malls at the very prominent locations in the city to celebrate their, or to celebrate their successes, and also the interest, like this, to say thanks to God for their successes. Okay. So here are some examples of these mosques. Here, a mosque that was built in the largest shopping mall in the city, which is actually a structure built at the top of its parking garage. Okay, it's a simple, actually it's a simple box, right? But it's adorned with various details that are associated with design from the Islamic world. Like there's like a tiny minarets, pointed arches, a dome, and the space inside is like it's simply like a very simple space, very neutral, white. It's a small mosque, actually, 200 square meter, right? But during the daily prayer time, is people like making long queue to use this space. But the emphasis of this design is like all these details, the decorated surfaces, which drew heavily on these geometric patterns. Another example of this is a celebratory mosque, which is built by a very successful businesswoman located at the intersections of two major arteries in the cities. It's a large mosque, monumental scale. Right? It's a simple geometric shapes but you can see here it's adorned with a traditional roof, and then with 5 minarets. You can see the design features here, like a lot of elements like polychromatic arches, detailed columns, okay? Again, decorated surfaces inside and outside. Right? Okay. All of this, like something that those are elements that are associated with design of the Islamic world. Okay. My next example, actually, like some mosques in a very large public school in the city, compared to the two other examples. This is very toned down, very subdued, right? But still, this is the largest space in the school, and look at it in at its most prominent spot in the campus. Right? The space inside, right? So actually, it's a very, very simple, right? But the use of applique decorations, right? That indicate, right? This is a space for prayer, and you can see the color, right? The color of the roof's green, right? Which is associated with the color of Islam. Right? If we compare, right? Especially the space of traditional mosque, right? Which is it's a very complex. This is sequence from light to dark, right? There's a sense of axiality, like complex axis, like east to west, north to south, verticality, celebrations of details, like celebration of joinery, like the hierarchy of space, the hierarchy of details, the hierarchy of columns, and then compared to spaces that built since the 1950s to this day, right? A very simple geometric grid, right? Neutral, with like a sense of actuality, except for the directions to the Qibla wall. Yeah, here in a summary, like the comparisons between the formal comparisons between traditional and contemporary mosques. And one was one which is based on cluster symmetrical. It has a complex axes, like articulations of timber frame, versus a building which is simply a singular object, simple geometry, a neutral grid wall. Like this is the kind of spaces that we have for worship now, right? Formal conversion still, right? The emphasis on the design of the roof, right? But the change from frame structure to mass structure, right? That relates, like this is actually, right? That relates to the way buildings are built, like now the vernacular way of buildings, right? It's low key technology, low skilled workers, okay? Concrete frame and masonry in a very simple way of designing things like this. Right? Now here, right, and the transformations of space of worship, right, since from one that in which the meaning was emerged from carefully choreographed spatial experience in the past into which actually hence place of worship now into a space which is a pure functionality, then space of worship, right? If we follow Lefebvre distinction between place and space. Now, but this is actually the for lack of a better word, the power of this type of space, because it's neutrality, right? Lack of definition, it could be inserted and placed anywhere. Right? If we follow Marc Augé, right? But identify this as a mosque is simply because it's labeled as a place of worship, and then following this logic further, right? Referring to Lefebvre, right? This neutral space would rely so much on visual languages, and this is this kind of labeling here, right? It's the use of all these surface decorations, right? In other words, it's a kind of wrapping, right? And the wrapping of this neutral space, right? Using this epic or pastiche elements, right? And this all, right? Wrapping that convey visual codes of something that's associated with being a Muslim. Right? And here, right? This visual code, just like what happened with social media, it's like it's a collage of fragments of images of things associated with Islam from all over the world. Right? So hence we see, right? So all this mix and match. So here we see the stylistic change, right? From a traditional mosque to contemporary mosque, like now, which is simply like a collage of all things, like a vernacular roof combined with this collage of all these images associated with Islam. Right? And here, like, what I like to emphasize at the end of my paper is like the change of narrative, right? In the past, right? The narrative of being Indonesian and also being Indonesian Muslim is one is likely controlled by the authoritarian regime, right? One single narrative, one way of interpreting that. But now, since the end of this and the since of the end of the authoritarian regime, and now it's Indonesia, it's like, you know, very polysemic, very opportunistic, right? And now what we have is a very polysemic way of creating the narrative of being a Muslim, Indonesian Muslim. So everybody create their own narratives, a collage of things that circulate in the internet that promote the lifestyle of being a Muslim. And this is what this is the point that would like to end my paper with, is like the change from a singular tightly controlled narrative, right, into something which is polysemic, right, which is facilitated by this our mediated and mediatized word. Okay, and with that, I would like to end my talk. Thank you so much for following my presentations.
Thank you so much, Arif. I really appreciate this presentation. And I found a lot of, actually, though on the surface, it looks like Hans' work is radically, like his presentation was radically different than yours. I saw this idea of how community centers are moving in these different cultures in ways that actually express their different value systems, right?
Yeah.
They may contrast with one another, but I think I see like a lot of similarities in them at a deeper model. So we have, I would really appreciate if the audience would hold their questions till we finish the next two presentations. Our next speaker is Dina Menameh, who's joining us from the American University of Beirut in Lebanon. And she is, as per the title of her talk, Rethinking the Pedestrian Experience in Beirut. And she's looking particularly at Hikma, an area in Beirut, which has the traditional built environment still intact, but however, it has been kind of truncated by a highway. And I think like some of her talk is about kind of this idea of recovery through pedestrian experiences. So Dina, I hand it over to you from here and you could do a screen share.
Hello, hello everyone. Thank you, Shandana, for the introduction. Can you all see my screen? Okay. So actually, I'm gonna start my presentation with telling you that this neighborhood that I wrote about and was still intact was actually completely demolished by the Beirut port explosion that happened last year on the 4th of August, 2020. So today you are 1 year after the explosion and a lot of things have changed. I have adjusted my presentation accordingly because it was felt completely irrelevant to be talking about something that has disappeared. But you were very right in saying that indeed the pedestrian experience and our urban heritage is part of the recovery process. So in this paper, I'm gonna talk about how I'm gonna still talk about how it started, and then I'm gonna shift to today's content. First, Beirut's pedestrian possibility or impossibility. Beirut still allows distinctive possibilities for pedestrian within its urban environment. This is particularly observed today along public staircases. The city presents geographic assets that makes the implementation and the practices of sustainable options of urban mobility, such as walking, cycling, and other modes, very possible. It has a small scale, gentle topographic profile, and a moderate climate throughout the year. On the urban level, the city's organization is organized into tightly knit neighborhoods that have unique architectural and socioeconomic character with a wide array of mixed-use functions on the ground floor level. And it is an inviting factor to explore the potential of walking as an inclusive, safe, and accessible activity to all. The network of pedestrian mobility, streets, alleyways, urban staircases has been developing as a mixed-use public spaces where city dwellers actively interact in multiple ways within their urban environment. This is due to the scarcity of public open spaces in Beirut, which amount to 0.8 square meter of green space per capita. Unfortunately, many physical and spatial challenges obstruct the pedestrian experience and render it unsafe and unpleasant. First, it is alarmingly hindered by the absence of effective planning frameworks and safety measures to allow for safe pedestrian flows. According to WHO, in 2018, pedestrians formed 37% of deaths by road users in Lebanon. From a spatial perspective, most of Beirut's streets lack proper sidewalks, pedestrian signage, and safe access to disabled people, elderly, and children. Different kinds of obstruction can be discerned that contribute to a degraded experience. First, there are the obstructions on a neighborhood scale where shortcuts can completely block passageways and neighborhoods for security concerns. On the second hand, other obstructions materialize physically, such as sidewalks used as parking spots, misplaced urban equipment, vehicular trespassing, difficult pedestrian crossings, and lack of maintenance by the municipality. Moving from the, or actually zooming in more on the pedestrian experience, I have explored the potential of public urban staircases as pocket of urban heritage. These are located in some of Beirut's neighborhoods that have a certain topographic profile, and they are intricately interwoven with the urban fabric, providing essential shortcuts and accessibility to different places. And within them, they do have a lot of different spatial typologies of empty buildings, abandoned structures, green pockets, businesses that are on either way of the staircase. They also host a lot of economic practices that animate the ground floor, and they do provide an evidence to Beirut's historical urban development. They are also spaces of culture, of history, as well as everyday life for the residents as well as visitors. This dichotomy and the pedestrian experience in Beirut is actually the product of years of dominant approach to mobility planning, an approach that always lacked a comprehensive, sustainable vision. It favored a normative approach to planning. It was subject to political fragmentation and state incapacity, and it always favored the dominance of vehicular modes of transportation, favoring the use of private vehicles, the lack of public transportation infrastructure, and it has also resulted in highways and roads disrupting tightly knit residential neighborhoods. So as you can see here in a brief historical overview of Beirut's development of networks of roads, it has always favored roads and highways cutting through the rural agrarian character of the city. However, in the past decades, we have seen alternative approaches that criticize the normative planning approach. Particularly is a proposal that is liaison douce. It is a proposal that was done in partnership with the municipality, and it has it's a city scale proposal that integrated different modes of transportation in the city. It allowed for sustainable vision through through the creation of designated lanes for walking, cycling, public transportation, integration of public open green spaces, the reactivation of urban nodes, and the focus on the heritage assets of the city that were incorporated in this proposal. However, as most of the projects in Beirut, it was halted due to political pressure, and it was put in the drawer. Another project that was more successful yet of a smaller scale is a street rehabilitation project in the Hamra neighborhood, which also allowed for a community-led process through town hall meetings where residents have expressed their visions of how we can re-envision the street, how we can provide pockets of interaction on the social and on the economic level, and how we can foster the historic character of the street. Finally, the project that was the focus of the paper is the Fuad Boutros Highway, which is a product of the 1960s era, and that was a highway that was planned to cut through the historic neighborhood of Mar Mkhayel, destroying its socio-spatial practices, endangering its historic landscape and built heritage, and causing evictions and expropriations of plot. However, studies have proven its inefficiency in solving traffic congestion, and so it stirred a lot of public outcry, urban-based activism, and civil mobilization. That was back in 2014. It was also part of the program of Beirut Madinati and the electoral program of 2016. It advocated for the preservation of the urban heritage of the neighborhood and the complete hold of the project, which was fortunately successful. Now, part of this mobilization was my academic project, where I looked at the different public staircases and pedestrian linkages in the neighborhood, how we can rethink them through design into an alternative strategy to the highway, how we can reactivate the site, open green spaces, retain its urban spatial hierarchy, and preserve the communal spaces that are intrinsic to this neighborhood. Through I have proposed micro-intervention of public and private functions, such as affordable housing, communal kitchens, library, and workshops that looked at the urban regeneration on a multidisciplinary level in the city. However, all of this seems now irrelevant now that the explosion happened. However, in Beirut, we have a big repertoire of lessons learned in sustainable urban development that integrate urban heritage to mobility planning, that investigate historic urban environment in a multidisciplinary fashion, providing alternative solutions to complex spatial challenges, and that prioritize participation and community engagement to provide sustainable visions. And this was well inserted, especially now in the post-COVID-19, where we have seen the necessity of open spaces in the city. And it is even more important today after the explosion to rethink our open spaces as parcels of our city, where people can show solidarity, where people can actually meet and congregate. So to go back to the staircases, Beirut, I start with the explosion, giving you a very quick overview. I think it has very widely shared over the past year. The explosion caused the destruction of the city's historical neighborhood, specifically Mar Mikhael and Gemmayzeh, which was at a very close proximity. As you can see, many of the staircases and the surrounding historical fabric was demolished. Specifically, Mar Mikhael and Gemmayzeh, they have 8 staircases that used to host a lot of cultural events and linkages to the residences. After the explosion, the community flocked to these staircases and started grassroots initiatives for their rehabilitation to allow people access their residences, their shops, and their vital functions. Today, 1 year later, we are witnessing a new approach to the rehabilitation of these staircases in a way that first includes the community, include the youth, but also include a digital dimension to this. So in a way, it is providing a fertile grounds to reimagine the pedestrian experience in Beirut in a context of recovery. It is also making us question our role as practitioners and our designers, how we can mediate the recovery, how we can think in the present while learning from the past and projecting our visions to the future, a future where recovery is highlighted, where sustainability is key, where everybody can actually experience the public space in an inclusive, comprehensive way that allows for expression, that allows for cultural representation at the nexus of the virtual and the traditional. Thank you. That's it.
Excellent. You did have another 6 minutes, so that's great. Okay, so, but I think we can move forward. Our last presentation is a paper co-written apparently by 3 people, Maya Yahya, Amira Al-Haqi, and Mohammed Al-Musalami. But it will be presented by Maya Yahya, and she is going to take us to Egypt, to Cairo, and going to stay at the urban scale. So if like the first 2 papers were at an architectural scale, the other 2 papers at this urban scale. And her paper is titled Integrating Traditions in the Design Process and Practice, Opportunities and Challenges in Historic Cairo. Maya, you take it from here.
Thank you, Shandana, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm sharing now the presentation. I hope you can see it. Is it clear for you? Okay. The co-author of my paper is Dr. Amira Al-Haqi and Mr. Mohammed Al-Musalami. We are all researchers on the topic of historic Cairo. So, the sense of place has becoming increasingly blurred in historic areas nowadays. And this is due to many factors. Among these factors, the fact that the local community is not integrated in the design process of its public spaces. The practice of tradition in public spaces of historic Cairo is the focus of the investigation. So the methodology is articulated in 3 sections. First, an account on insight on tradition, its meaning and evolution through the writings of several scholars who addressed the phenomena in its various facets. Secondly, the case study of historic Cairo is developed to understand the critical issues related to interventions from the point of view of the local community. And finally, a decision-making framework is proposed to integrate traditional social practices in public spaces of historic Cairo. In the era of globalization and technologies of communication, tradition in historic cities is undergoing a significant transition. Some traditional practices are struggling to survive, and other expression must adapt to change. Cultural preservation seeks to validate not only the physical places of historic significance, but also the traditions, heritage, and values that provide context to the sites of collective memory. Hence, it's crucial to understand the context within which the design process will take place. This context includes the socio-cultural space, the meanings and cultural practices embodied in the urban space, but also all the people and stakeholders involved in the process. This entails an understanding of their social conditions, as the social aspects cannot be isolated from the cultural aspects. So the present research is concerned with the context of public spaces in historic cities within which cultural manifestations are embedded in the experience of public life portrayed in the festivals and traditional religious events, hosted in its streets, and the liveliness felt in the everyday activities of people. The definitions of public space as a vital component of urban life have raised the debate regarding ownership, control, access, and use. So here's the definition of public space according to Carr and others. Public space is the common ground where people carry out the functional and ritual activities that bind a community, whether in the normal routine of daily life or during festivities. It's the stage upon which the drama of communal life unfolds. So, in question of power and challenges of public participation in Egypt, the recurrent practice is that people are not even informed of the changes and developments that occur in the public realm. Decisions are taken, projects are developed, and local communities are not engaged in the process and are confronting with facts on the ground affecting their everyday life. Here we can see a tweet which is a reaction against the demolition of the necropolis of the Mamluk in historic Cairo, and it was demolished to make space for a highway. And this tweet expressed anger, of course, and this was last year in July 2020. So historic Cairo is considered the largest medieval city in the world where traditions are still alive in daily activities. The case of historic Cairo can clarify the challenges faced by planners in their quest of social justice for local communities and their aim to assert the sense of place, which cannot be possible unless a bottom-up approach is adopted. The first step of this approach is grasping the perception of people in respect of the intervention on their local built environment. Here it's a map of the area studied in the research, Al-Darb al-Ahmar district, Al-Khalifa district, and Al-Hattaba. And you can imagine the scale of the area. Here, 1 kilometer. You can see Al-Azhar Park here. It's 1 kilometer long, for example. The methodology to integrate local traditions in the design process begins by understanding the local community's perspective, which is based on information collected during focus group discussions following a qualitative approach. 4 focus groups, including residents, shopkeepers, and workers' representatives, were conducted in the area of Al-Darb al-Ahmar, Al-Khalifa, and Al-Hattaba. In our research, each group varied between 6 and 8 participants who were selected to be representative of different age groups, gender, and activities. The exploration about traditions and its integration within the studied areas was implicit in the discussions, even if interrelated environmental and economic issues seem to prevail at the top of priorities of the local communities. So the problem of historic Cairo is mainly complex due to 3 interest groups involved. First, the local community, who is interested in using the area in its traditional lifestyle. Second, the worldwide community represented in organization and whose objective is to preserve the international cultural heritage. And last, the Egyptian government bodies in charge of main decisions in the area, and its main objectives lie in the tourist-oriented activities. In order to integrate the expressions of tradition in the design process and practice, a holistic approach, including the needs and priorities of the local community, must be adopted. These priorities are actually a reflection of everyday life of people. From the input of the 4 focus group discussions, the residents' feedback was assimilated, and the following priorities were identified. First, architecture and urban environment. Here it's an image or a photo of Al-Mu'izz Street after the regeneration, and we can see here that it was renovated and pedestrianized by the Supreme Council of Antiquity between 2009 and 2012, and a real appropriation of the place by the local community occurred. And we see that the residents feel a reconnection with their monuments after the intervention. So about services and infrastructures, we can see that they are perceived as the less appealing image attributes of historic Cairo. The majority of respondents describe the traffic as one of the major problems facing the area. And of course, this problem increased during the last 30 years. About social changes and job opportunity, we see that the creation of employment opportunity through vocational training introduced by the Aga Khan Trust for Culture project in Al Darb Al Ahmar was a very important positive effect cited. In the focus group sessions, people stressed on the importance of creating new opportunities in artisanal workshops to help family out of poverty. So the participants stated the importance of breathing life back to dying traditional handicraft of historic Cairo, such as carpentry, traditional woodwork, Mamluk traditions of inlaying brass and silver, copper works, and so on. Such skilled techniques are not documented in books. Rather, they are handed down from generation down to the next. Here are two photos. Before and after the lockdown of 2020, and we can see in Al Khayamiyya Street in Al Darb Al Ahmar, we can see that the closing of the traditional commercial activities has a great impact on the vitality of the street and its sense of place. About the cultural activities, we can see that the Moulid, for instance, which is a celebration of the birth of Prophet Muhammad, but also his descendants. It's a very important cultural activity in the area. Here it's a map of Al-Ashraf Street or Al-Shurafa Street, as it's called, meaning the street of the saints. And this is where there is a concentration of a lot of mausoleums and places of worship when Moulids are held in different times of the year. So this is, for instance, the Sufi order marches and the itinerary of the route towards Al Hussein Mosque in the commemoration of Mawlid Al Hussein. About tourism, in Al Hattaba, the residents have stressed on the significant impact of closing the citadel gate that used to link the neighborhood to the historic monument. We can see that the area of Al Hattaba, it's very close to the citadel of Cairo, and the problem is that the local residents used to sell their handicraft goods to the tourists who were passing from the street of Al Hattaba before entering the citadel complex. After the closing of the gate, many shopkeepers lost their major source of revenue, and this demonstrates how a planning decision from the authorities can have a great impact on resident everyday life. This is a master plan proposed by Mugawra, which is an association that work for the preservation of historic Cairo, and they proposed, of course, the reopening of the gate to link the citadel to Al Hattaba again. About housing and utilities, we can see that in Al Hattaba, the housing stock is deteriorating severely because of the legal system. In fact, Al Hattaba has been classified as level 2 informal settlement, which means that it's an informal settlement in need of replanning. The result of this administrative category entails eviction, demolition, and removal. And at the same time, it's considered an historic area, which is a problem, of course, for the area and for new intervention. About education and vocational training, participants see that education does not offer anything that is useful for the new generations and stressed for the need to provide more vocational training centers and technical education school. About the role of the media, of course, it's very important. The streets and hara of historic Cairo have been the scene of several series and movies, and many celebrities have come to perform, to attend events. the local community feels now that the place is valued, this improved local community's sense of pride and belonging to the place. So the challenging faces the local community in Al-Darb Al-Ahmar, Al-Khalifa, or Al-Hattaba are similar. Residents have a strong attachment to their place and they are bonded by a collective memory, but the environmental and legal and economic issues and pressures are overwhelming and difficult to bear. So in order to integrate tradition in the production of the public space, including tangible and intangible heritage, and respond appropriately to the manifestation of the cultural manifestation of local community, public participation is crucial, as tradition cannot be separated from its caretakers, the residents. So in this framework, the socio-cultural dimension is engineered in the planning design process, and the community is actively involved in the decision-making process. The aim is to integrate the familiar, the popular culture, everyday landscapes and activities in the process to consolidate the local identity and preserve traditions which are grounded in the everyday life, in leisure and work practice. So here, in this framework, we can see the design process and its different phases: selection of the design teams, the pre-design studies, the design criteria, and so on. And from one side, we can see the participatory process, how it goes, the focus group input and the interview inputs, how to elaborate a SWOT analysis with idea, needs, and priorities and regulation coming from the residents and from all the design teams and representatives of the local community. And from the other side, we can see all the stakeholders of the local authorities, the governorate and the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. And this framework calls for a change of mindsets and the acculturation of the local community, the designers and the local administrator, so each group can assimilate the culture and interest of the other, and so we can build synergies between the different actors to integrate different points of view and to grasp the complexities related to governance in the urban space. So the quality of life in these areas is largely determined by the opportunity to appropriate public spaces. The satisfaction of belonging to the place is a strong bond which reinforces interconnections and increased commitment among community residents and artisans. It's also a significant motivation to stay, invest, and grow different activities which constitute a major asset for the future development of the historic era. Urban projects operate as part of a broader system and involve high degrees of uncertainty. By using an appropriate people-centered approach, the design team can adapt its proposals to different needs and constraints and meet the objectives. Designers and planners can integrate formal and informal uses of public spaces, places of conviviality where community events are held, and where permanent, repeated temporal activities change in the urban realm. The framework proposed, designed to be consistent yet not restricting, is thus conceived as a platform, a space for dialogue that aims to reach a consensus, capitalizing on the site's unique potential, supporting and validating traditional culture. The role of planners, designers, and decision makers is to use this tool within the regeneration strategies to make use of the place cultural assets and fit them in one narrative. The multiple voices integrated since the inception of the process until the implementation validate the plan and legitimize the design process. So each generation will have to rediscover tradition for itself, finding in it its values and its strength, and bringing new meaning to resist a fading of place
لو
identity.
انت عايزه لنفسك اعملي، لو هتتعشي اعملي لنفسك.
A creative process for the reinterpretation and reframing of historic and cultural meanings would revive public spaces in historic cities in times of cultural shifts to fit new challenges. Thank you.
Can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Shandana. You are muted.
What the heck? I spoke a whole paragraph and nothing happened. Nobody heard me, but myself. Okay, I'll start again. So we now have enough time for a little bit, even over an hour for Q&A, but I think we can cut the section short as well. But I want to start, while everybody else is formulating their questions, I want to start with kind of connecting the 4 papers together, because in my mind, even though you guys are talking, all the papers presented from architectural to urban scale, there is a desire for thinking about architecture and urban environment as ways of revitalizing those communities. For example, in case of Germany, the transformation of elementary school and other higher education schools into the rural life, for example, the examples that Jan showed, as a way of subsistence of the community, right? But in a very, like in case of Germany, very much to allow women and mothers to be a part of the formal economy. Whereas in case of Arif's paper, it was really thinking about the mosque as this kind of a new community center that has really come into being in the past 20 years or 25 years as Islamization in our part of the world has increased or has accelerated. Dina, your example kind of also poses this question about vegetation and replantation as a way of integrating the communities into becoming, stakeholders of their surroundings. So I wanted to ask you guys for all 4 to talk a little bit about some of the strategies, a little bit in depth. I think like all of you have talked a little bit about kind of integrating local voices, different techniques than what traditionally when I went to school, which was, I think, like in the 19th century. So it was a very long time ago. So I'm super old. So like, how have we you guys have tried new techniques of integrating community voices and making them stakeholders in their projects? Yeah. Han, you want to start? Because you actually made an argument about that this is a changing role of the architect, right? So what are some of the strategies that you have used to incorporate local voices in your process?
I think it's very important to create a platform of discussion between the residents, the shopkeepers, the artisans, and the design team and the local authorities. All the stakeholders must, from the beginning of the process, must be involved with the problems, the issues, the potential of the place, because they understand the place and they know they have a collective memory in the place. They know what it's important. So even if there are many legal and economic and environmental problems, the discussion and to reach a consensus is very, very important. And this is the role of the architects and the planner, to be mediators or facilitators between the voice of the residents and the shopkeepers and the artisans, and between the local authorities and all the stakeholders and NGOs.
Mm-hmm. All right. Jan, go ahead, Dina. Yeah.
I'd like to build on what Mai is saying. Definitely the role of the architect or the practitioner being a mediator or a facilitator between the community as a main stakeholder and other state actors is very important. But what is also important is to investigate the methods of participation. And right now we have so many case studies in the world and so many methods that allow us to explore this facilitation process, like participatory mapping, participatory storytelling, photography, where the community actually shares the representation of the space they live in the present or they project to the future. And particularly today, after COVID-19 and the turn towards the digital, the methods have been growing and getting more more creative in letting the voices and the aspirations of community actually reach the different stakeholders. So this is a very important point to underline. First, as Mai said, the multiple stakeholders and the multiple methods that are context specific and that also like examine what is on the ground and what the community can deal with.
Jan, you want to go ahead before I?
Yeah, I think in our case, at least, it's interesting that basically most of our projects didn't start with having in mind to bring people together. Most of the time, the design of the social environment of the community spaces came as a byproduct from designing a school or a kindergarten. So suddenly it appeared that there was a social problem that had to be solved, and that the purpose of building a school could help with that. So in our case, the mechanisms or the tools were not really clear how to proceed. So we had to kind of like in each project, like we had one project that started with the leaking roof, and then it became a major development in the end. And a lot of these things start like this, that the public clients realize that they have a social problem. So in our case, we just have to talk to a lot of people and try to bring them together. And there's a lot of meetings, and we don't have too many methods. We don't have that we can kind of like foresee. It's a very accidental process, which is very interesting. So it's not formalized.
Yeah, actually, for me, in my my paper here, it's like actually that's the questions. What is local voice? What is community voice in Indonesia right now, right? Because what people consider as being a Muslim, expression of being a Muslim in Indonesia, no, it's like something's really conditioned by these circulations of images, what people offered in through social media, right? To be frank, I started this paper when some of my high school friends asked me, why don't you design a mosque for us? Okay, so I went there and started sketching. I asked people, what do you think about what is a mosque now? Right? And the answer is is everything that it's very similar. Right? So things that they saw circulating on Twitter or Instagram. So that's what for me it's like. The community and the local voices is actually it's not something that that came from their own. It's something that's conditioned by the circulation of images, like the promotions of what being a Muslims now in Indonesia, right? Just for an example, and another parts of cultural life, right? The names, Indonesian names now is very Arabic. Like in my time, it's very Japanese names. It's very popular now. Names of newly born kids are very Arabic usually, right? And the way people dress, though, right? The same thing too, right? The way people imagine and envision what is a mosque here is actually something that's conditioned by this circulation of images. Like so, that's from the design point of view, right? From the point of constructions and techniques like that. Again, right? The less and less people nowadays here in Indonesia that knows how to put together a building nicely. I guess everything has become like again like the disciplines of these local voices and local knowledge, both in the sense of design and in the sense of constructions. And yes, I think there's something that's to be concerned with, but also could be what can we do with that? We can do with that situations. Like how can we work with those situations? Right? And that's what perhaps I hinted somewhere. This is actually about selling images, selling images of what being a community of Muslims, what it really means.
Yeah, but that is kind of changing. I do a lot of community engaged work in indigenous communities here in Utah. And what we do, what I have found, my experience tells me that if you do sweat equity work, like for example, when Dina, you were presenting some of your images as well as Maya, I was thinking, and even Jan, right? Like, unlike what Arif was presenting, which is one set of people imposing particular ways of thinking about what a mosque is, what it ought to look like. It's very different in the other three cases, not only because of the scale and the building typologies, but because of the way the communities are organized around very different set of questions. But what we discovered is that the minute you make people do part of construction, do part of painting, do part of planting, maintaining the buildings, right? And then they help they become stakeholders at a level and engaged in the processes in which the traditional top-down corporate architectural practices do not allow them to do. So I was wondering if some of you are thinking about these as techniques of community engaged participation, because it seems like all of you are thinking about revitalizations of communities that are feeling alienated from their built environment and that have very different needs than what the built environment currently provides them. And so, is that a conversation that's happening in your communities or in your practices? Or is that not yet something that is valued?
Yes, but this is the conversations that actually is no longer defined by or guided by a singular voice and singular power, like in the past, up until, in Indonesian case, up until late 90s, right? But it's more like by the market forces today, like that's shaped by this influencers. Actually, it's very polysemic. It's very everybody, everybody offer different kinds of interpretations, and that's what actually shaped this stakeholder. Yes, right? So yes, of course, right now, stakeholders are more empowered, right? They are more willing to speak out, right? But the kind of voice that they communicate is actually, you could see the reflections of what's being promoted through contemporary media. Like, so yes, in one sense, right, it is more empowering in the sense that everybody now can say anything, right? Just like this kind of mosque, from very traditional, very Western oriented, or like a mix mesh out of everything, right? But also at the same time, right? So the voice that they bring to the bill is actually shaped by this by what's being broadcast or spread through our media. Right? There's no longer a singular voice now.
Yeah. So Arif, I hear a kind of a cynicism in your reading that I don't see in Hans or Jan's kind of work, right? Which is and I don't see it in Maya's or Dina's either. Could it be that the building typology that he is working with, which is a secular building typology and has the aura, or no, I wouldn't use the word aura, or has the kind of PR around it, right? A public relations campaign that this is actually, education is great. We don't see it, education, as creating not only like new types of subjectivities. that we think are all in the positive, right? So there is a kind of when I was listening to Jan, I felt that there's a lot of very positive reading of what the community needs, even though it's ad hoc and emerging, right? And the same in Dina and Maya's kind of conversation, but not in yours. And maybe it's because you're dealing with a mosque, which is necessarily kind of sectarian, dare I say, more a masculine building typology, dare I say, kind of like particular class dynamic is expressed in it.
Yeah, I think that's the point of my papers. Make a critical reading of yeah, that's right. If you say this is cynical, yeah.
One is being written as a historian, the other three are being written as practitioners, right? So I think like that actually changes the way we think about it. Practitioners have more hope than historians.
Yeah. I think I agree with you, Shandana. The paper about the school of Jan Breker was very interesting in the meaning of the role of the school other than education as a community center. You see in Egypt, the schools are for education, of course, and also only for, you know, the period of electoral and votes, and where people need space to go and vote and political campaign and this and so on, but they are not used as a facility that a community can benefit from. So the idea, and this is what I teach to my students, how to use a school in summertime, in the evening. How can the community be a part of the activities that are in the school? So I think it was a very positive and an interesting paper.
Yeah.
Arif, I have a question. Like in our case, it's like that the social roles and activities that the religious institutions traditionally took on. Like in the old days, the church had a monopoly on education, and it did a lot of social services, like taking care of old people, taking care of weak people. Lots of hospitals were part of the church. So the church is losing these kind of functions out of the development of the society, also political decisions. So you said that there's like so many mosques popping out of everywhere. Do those places take on social services? Are they offering social services to the community, or are they just restricted to a religion?
This is a very good point. Like historically and traditionally in Indonesia, mosques are not in programmatic way providing social services, but they are more like a informal leader and shaper of opinions in society. Like so, because the endowments are usually very, very small, so they don't have, you know, most of mosques do not have enough money to provide social services. But nowadays, right, so opinions in society is really highly shaped by all these gatherings in the mosque. Right? So in so many mosques, and then, you know, in the past, like people visit mosques like, you know, once a week, but no, every day, like 5 times a day, people went to the mosque, and all this, you know, even like now COVID things is also, you know, the narrative also shaped by what's being preached in the mosque, right? So yes, formally, like you know, mosques do not have much role in society, but informally, it's a very informal, you know, they're like social wise, space wise, spatial wise, and community wise. They're like the shaper and the leader in society. Yeah.
So can I say the reason why and I'm going to open it up to the rest of the the audience, but the reason why I saw such a similarity between John's paper and Ara's paper is because I went to a regular school when I was a kid in Pakistan, but then in the afternoons, before our parents came home, our babysitting almost happened in the mosque, where we would be doing our homework, where we'll be playing games, right? Because we had courtyards, and it was our daycare, right? So in the community, and even today, it is where a lot of kids find jobs. It is but it happens, John, at an informal level, because most parts of the Muslim world that are not highly industrialized, like Germany, have actually a lot of informal systems that hold the formal systems up, right? So everything that you're doing at a formal level, usually mosques in other, and that is why the radicalization of, in both directions, the Muslims like me who wear sleeveless clothes, and Muslims who actually wear hijab, right? We all have grown up in the same types of kind of built environment in that sense. Yeah, but it happens informally, not through policy changes. Yeah. Does anybody in the audience have questions? If not, should we call it a close?
Hey, Shundana, this is Mark.
Yes, Mark. Yes.
So my video is not working, but well, if the host can allow me to put my video on. But we do have another networking break in about 15 minutes if you want to join. The link to the break is in the program, so it's an updated program. So I just want to say thanks. Those were some great papers, and I'd like to see them published. So Dina, I do want to talk more about your paper in the Beirut pedestrian landscape. I teach urban design at the University of Oregon, and I think it was fascinating, and the graphics were very good, and what it means, with the world that we're in right now. And the explosion that you identified was significant. So, but all of the papers were very good. So hope to see you at the break. And Shundana, great job. Thank you so much for being the moderator.
I didn't do anything. Everybody stayed within 20 minutes. It was unbelievable. So.
Amazing.
Thank you, Shundana.
Thank you, Shundana. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Around in other
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Maya, Dina, John, and
Bye. Thank you.
Umar, thank you so much. Yeah.